This presentation deals with the criminological responses related to Topic Group 8, the international topic for the former Yugoslavia. The conflicts of the former Yugoslavia range from 1991 to 1995 and primarily involved the now independent states of Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina and Serbia. All sides were seen to have committed multiple crimes, which resulted in accusations of genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. The crime that led to the particular attention by the international community was the ethnic cleansing performed by Serbian forces against the Bosniak Muslims. This involved the mass rape of civilians, forced displacement, and mass killings, which together added up to be classified as genocide. However, the ethnic cleansing was not limited to the Serbian forces, as some media outlets would have you believe. Operation Storm saw more than 250,000 Serbs ethnically cleansed from Croatia during the conflict. The attacks on UN peacekeepers also characterised the lawlessness of the wars. To completely understand the reasons for this conflict, political, social and cultural issues need to be outlined. The death of the long-standing leader of the Yugoslav state, Tito, resulted in significant political instability and saw some states seeking independence. This went against the political agendas of many, especially the Serbs. And the other important thing to understand is the large ethnic minorities resided in each state, and they feared persecution through political instability. So the political leaders used this instability and fear to rise the ethnic minorities and forward their political agendas. This caused the divide of the former Yugoslavia into ethnic groups and resulted in some of the worst atrocities seen since World War II and left much of the region in complete destruction. In response to the crimes, the United Nations formed the International Criminal Tribunal of the former Yugoslavia, or the ICTY. The Specialist Tribunal was one of the first of its kind and was seen as a step toward universal jurisdiction and sought to end the impunity for war criminals. The inadequacy of local courts and the lack of resources needed to correctly prosecute international crimes was a major concern for United Nations. As a result, the ICTY had primacy over national courts and had the ability to delegate cases to domestic courts. This was particularly controversial as the crimes being prosecuted were not between but within states, because at the time of the conflict it was Yugoslavia, not separate individual states. This led to questions relating to sovereignty and how it was being taken away by globalization of crime. This is exampled by the Tadic case. The primary mandates of the ICTY were the peaceful reconciliation of Yugoslav nations, punishing offenders, and delivering justice to victims. It resulted in the prosecution of a number of high-profile war criminals. However, it is heavily contested whether this resulted in reconciliation or contributed to justice for victims. It was the first international court to indict individuals on sex crimes, but was ineffective in persecuting crimes of this nature. The major benefit of the ICTY was providing the resources and institutional mechanisms for prosecuting high-profile political and military officials. The ICTY had a 78% success rate in prosecuting these high-ranking officials by the time of its completion, and it sought to make individuals accountable and steer away from the group identification of crime that had been at the heart of the conflict. There are some that suggest that it also provided a general deterrent for crimes such as genocide, but this is almost impossible to prove through quantifiable evidence unless we have more of these type of wars, which we all hope we don't. Another key benefit of the tribunal was the re-establishment of the rule of law in the villages and communities through the domestic courts. The local authorities did not have sufficient experience or resources to prosecute complex international crimes, especially after the large-scale institutionalized violence that the communities suffered for such a long period of time. The RCTY helped to bridge the gap in this respect, and tried to help restore the rule of law in these communities. The RCTY can also be seen as shaping the procedures for future international courts, such as the International Criminal Court, or the ICC. Interesting research by Holler and Bijleveld disproved the thought of many that the ICTY sentencing was not consistent. It highlighted similarities in the consistency of domestic courts. This helped to define the procedures of fairness and due process that would be used for the ICC in the future. The ICTY was also dealt its fair share of criticism since its inception. A major critique was that it focused too heavily on the punishment of offenders compared to its commitment to the reconciliation of the region, which was one of its mandates it mentioned earlier. Research by Hagen has shown that merely punishing offenders only restored peace to those who belonged to a different ethnic group. This means that it showed that prosecution of an out-group member could help to initiate peace, but the prosecution of an in-group member could be motivation for continued violence. This proved to be a significant difficulty for the ICTY, and had to rely on members of groups accepting that other members of their group could be and were capable of severe criminal acts. Another problem that the ICTY faced was the lack of resources and funding from the international community. This resulted in an over-reliance on state conformity, the deprivation of the basic human right for a speedy trial, and poor handling of vulnerable witnesses, leading to secondary or possible secondary victimization. Due to the logistics of the court, it has been suggested by some that it failed the local villages and communities who needed focused reconciliation processes committed. The prosecution of high-level officials meant little to victims who saw the perpetrators who perpetrated crimes against them, like the lower-level offenders, walk free. This was a major barrier to restoring rule of law and justice processes in the local communities. Victor's justice was also a problem with the court, trusted with writing history. It was trusted with writing history and often meant that the West-leaning Croats were seen as the victors, and the Serbs were seen as the defeated party. From the research conducted on this topic, viable future directions have been outlined that could help to shape international criminal courts for the future. In the aftermath of large-scale, institutionalized, and in this case, ethnically driven violence, restorative justice mechanisms need to be more prominent. Criminal justice responses involving severe punishment are not always the best options. Non-criminal or restorative justice would greatly contribute to peaceful reconciliation. This may help to lessen ethnic tensions through peaceful discussion, where each group is able to gain understanding of victims on the other side. The views of the offenders is also a relatively untouched research topic that could add to this line of criminological response. Another future direction for similar international conflicts would be the implementation of the global justice norm at local level. This would be done by allowing villages and townships to debate and collectively implement transitional justice through guidance from international actors. This would help solve the critique of Western biases and re-establish the rule of law in these communities. Further examinations of sentencing by other international courts would help to determine whether procedural standards are consistent. A more defined structure for funding of ad hoc trials should be implemented by international criminal justice community. It's more difficult, but still needs to be addressed if international courts are to remain viable. My interest in this topic began after seeing a very strange news piece in which Croatian war criminal Slobodan Praljak drank poison after losing his appeal against his 20-year sentence. It was a very strange reason to choose this topic, but in what started as a surface attraction to an obscure story has led to a reshaping of my ideas surrounding international crime. It highlighted to me my prior notions of justice and challenged my assumption that Western procedures would work in most circumstances. Similar failings of Western domestic laws were abundant. Poor handling of vulnerable witnesses, sentencing inconsistencies, and a male-dominated criminal justice system were examples of this. This made me question whether the West, with its sometimes flawed system, should be enforcing its criminological ideals on the rest of the world. The taking away of sovereignty in order to globalize responses to crime is a complex and dangerous issue. It made me consider the differences between reconciliation and intrusion. I learnt that each criminological issue had its own political and social issues that surrounded it, and a thorough understanding of these issues is needed to determine the appropriate response. The lessons learned in terms of research relate to delving deeper to uncover more recent and contemporary articles. I have also learnt that to understand the topic and the arguments scholars are putting forth, you must work backwards to realise how they came to their conclusions. In the future, these lessons and questions will be explored in my further study.